Sorry.
defense. Oh, what did we get?
The Axios, the U.S. military conducted strikes in the area of the Strait of Hormuz.
Friday after the close, right on schedule.
There is no fucking way.
Oh my. Yeah.
Holy shit.
Well, yep. I'm seeing it too right now. Yep. Yeah. They don't wait long. Not long at all. As soon as it'll happen until about Sunday afternoon, and then it'll stop. But it tells you that
why do you think they did that? What's?
I think because the drone attacks on the Western ships earlier this week. I mean, if he's going to send out, social media posts making those threats, he had to buy it. I assume as soon as the market closed, he would do it. And we've been closed for 33 minutes. So
that is, I didn't expect that.
If there's anything that's going to happen, it's right after the close on Friday afternoon.
Always.
Any undisappointing news always happens on Fridays after the close. That goes back even in Trump 1.0, the master at that. But it tells you, yeah, I don't see the Iranians taking this lightly either. But your
timing is impeccable when you said, "I really don't think we're out of the woods."
Yeah.
Hats off to the timing of this statement.
By the way, you get Robert Pape on here now and then. I think I'm a big fan of his work, and he makes this point: Trump's in an escalation trap, and they all are. And because he goes back home and the deal's not good, then he gets bounced back over. The Iranians pushing the other direction. It's in a really difficult situation, and there is, nobody has an incentive to escalate. Yes, they do. Because if you're the Iranians, do you really think you're going to get your 300 billion? Do you think you'll have complete control of the 24 billion of assets that are frozen? Do you think they're really going to let them have tolling on the straits? It's not going to be an easy negotiation, and you're going to see skirmishes like this, and they'll keep going. The one thing I think that's different, and you'll be happy of it given where you are, is I do not think the Iranians will attack their neighbors.
I don't think so either. They are improving their relations. Even J.D. Vance said it yesterday that I'm not sure you saw a statement. The UAE is improving relations. Even the UAE, the most hawkish, is improving relations with Iran. That's what he said. I'm not adding anything to the statement. He said the UAE, which was the most hawkish against Iran, even they are improving relations with Iran. So yep. It's one of my guests told me that Iran might have actually. I think it was an Iranian guest who said the Iranian government might have made a mistake by easing up the pressure at the Strait of Hormuz too early, letting prices of oil drop and giving breathing space to Trump. And because Trump has the breathing space, he's able to. That's the reason he's striking. Well, he's more likely to strike. They said not now. He's striking because oil prices are low, so he can afford to F around, which is an interesting take.
Yeah, I was surprised they did it this early.
Yeah, but then again, in the midst of negotiations.
But then again, if they got the 12 billion freed, if they're getting cash right now, he's more willing to give the cash to protect the lower prices to get through this election. You notice that's why he's picking on the local U.S. oil companies, because they're the ones getting all the profit. He'll hurt them. And by the way, but you got to wonder. I mean, Texas has been hit pretty hard. Is Texas going to flip to being a blue state now? Particularly with how much damage they've inflicted on the oil sector. But I think I do agree with. I was surprised that they did it this early. But they're getting money out of the deal, and it's 60 days. That's why kick the can down the road. And I think that's what everybody's trying to do right here, is kick the can down the road and trying to improve their position. I think for Trump's perspective, he just needs to get through these midterms. That's 4 months from now. A lot can happen in 4 months. But he even admitted himself. He goes, yeah, we have about 4 weeks to go on supplies. And I do know that strategic reserves, you get down to those 300 levels. I think we're in the 320s. at this point. Right now, you get into those 300, right around 300, it starts to have problems. If you take that out of the system.
How do you think Iran would retaliate to this?
For them, they'll may strike the bases in there. I don't think they'll try to strike any of the energy assets of any of their neighbors. And will they try to strike Israel? The problem is their ability to retaliate was hit like the UAE or something like that. At this point, I don't think either the Gulf neighbors are not the problem they never were. In fact, the problem was the allegiance to U.S. and in Israel, and so now that there's more neutrality between the Gulf states and Iran, that's a big question. What are they going to hit? From the news report came out and said that the big naval base in Bahrain was hit a lot harder than what was initially thought. So the Iranians, they've already taken out most of the stuff that they can. So I don't know, do they hit something like one of the warships or something like that? But I think why the market doesn't care anymore is the probability of hitting energy assets in the region is quite low. But then what happens if Trump hits their energy assets like Kharg Island? Then that starts to become a different ballgame.
Yeah, we don't know what they struck, to be honest. So just to be clear, what's the price of oil? Is it how are the market's reacting?
It's closed.
It's closed. Yeah, it's Saturday evening. Yeah, it's closed.
Yep.
Of course it is.
So yeah, everything. By the way, there's only one assets out there that trade. Well, there's some perp swaps on oil, but all the crypto assets are the only ones that trade between now and Sunday at Singapore Open. And so we used to be able to read something into crypto. Well, that's the world you come from, right? Now the problem is that the liquidity in crypto is not enough to get a clean read on anybody's risk profile.
Yeah. And the crypto's in a world of its own right now. It's just reacting weirdly to everything because there's no liquidity and because it's in an extreme fear.
By the way, oil, the commodities are not too far off that. I mean, you look at the collapse in open interest, the VAR, the positioning. I don't know how much you can read in oil anymore or any of these commodities with the exception of gold because they're like crypto. They've been gutted in terms of liquidity. Nobody can hold a position when it was going 85 to 115 and 115 back to 85 to 115 to 85, up and down, up and down. That type of uncertainty, not only about the price, but about the fundamental picture, led people to just abandon the space because it's too risky. Which means if something tries to create a volatility, it's I think can move substantially to the upside, given how the shorts. So when I'm saying you got a lot of shorts out there, you have a vast majority of the positioning that's relatively small, all crowded into the short side. But yeah, it's like I would argue oil and most of the commodities are not much different than crypto because people have left, and it might be the volatility in both assets have created an environment that people do not want to. They rather go trade something safe like SpaceX IPOs and the Nasdaq, which may not turn out being so safe in 3 months, but that's where the liquidity is.
Are you surprised? I know you did say you're a bit surprised. How surprised are you they struck Iran? What is it? Do you think this is all part of them trying to get control of the Strait of Hormuz? Is that what we're seeing?
Yeah, you basically those hits on the Omani side, they were ships trying to go through the Oman side, and that they didn't have the paperwork to do it. So
they've given the reason. So this came out from CENTCOM now. That's the question I just asked you, and you got it right. U.S. Central Command announced that the U.S. forces carried out strikes against Iranian missile and drone storage sites, as well as coastal radar facilities, in response to yesterday's Iranian attacks on a Singaporean flagged cargo ship, the MV Ever Lovely in the Strait of Hormuz. CENTCOM said yesterday's drone strike on the commercial vessel violated the ceasefire and threatened freedom of navigation. It added that U.S. forces continue to coordinate the safe passage of commercial shipping through the strait and remain deployed to ensure compliance with the agreement with Iran. So there's going to be, I think, the biggest risk of a resumption of war, less so as Lebanon. I just don't think Iran would go too far and risk everything for Lebanon. I think it's a red line for them. But I think the biggest one is the Strait of Hormuz. It's just too strategically important for Iran. Unless, obviously, Israel goes and bombs Beirut and goes on a full-blown war against Hezbollah, that's a different story. But as long as we see the current status quo with small breaches, I think the status quo is the Iranians will not be pleased with it, but they'll be like, hey, we'll retaliate, but we'll be more limited. We're going to go through the whole MOU in the bin. The Strait of Hormuz could be a deal breaker, in my view.
Yep. And even Oman has said Oman is actually on Iran's side on all this. So that's why I think it's going to be really hard for the West to get what they want out of this. And I agree with you. It's where that deal breaker probably resides. And then for the U.S., losing it is huge from a diplomatic perspective because it's supposed to keep shipping lanes free. And so it's not just losing the straits, it's losing their reputation globally as being the protectorate of global shipping. And if they give this one up, it's a big issue, which is why I think Trump retaliated here pretty significantly, which we'll see. And then the Iranians go, well, why did I do all this if I didn't go to retain control of the straits?
Freaking hell. This is like, what do you call in cowboy movies? You've got the standoff, who pulls the gun first. It's kind of reminds me of that.
Yep, exactly. Or actually,
because now
it's almost like Groundhog Day too. The movie Groundhog Day. Everything just repeats over and over. But one of these days they're going to pull the trigger.
Everyone references that movie. I really need to watch it. Just one Groundhog Day. Let me see. I want to see the poster of the movie. Yeah, I haven't seen that movie. Oh, is that similar to 31st Dates or completely different?
No, it's complete. It's just the same thing, repeats over, and the same experience in life over and over and over.
So an interesting point here is there are the factions within Iran that were upset at how Iran eased. Probably even the Iranians that were supporting the deal, they'll probably look at the price of oil. They'll be like, what did we do? They wouldn't have expected the price of oil to collapse so quickly. And they'd be like, now Trump is going to be emboldened again. So from the Iranians being emboldened because they got Trump by the balls, now Trump, they kind of let go of the testicles, and the price of oil is down. And now Trump was like, you gave me leverage again. But exactly. To be fair, this is a response to drones fired at a ship going through the Omani side. And I went through the MOU. I was having a discussion with one of my guests debating the MOU. But the MOU number 5 says, upon the signing of the MOU, Iran will make arrangements using its best efforts for the safe passage of commercial vessels with no charge for 60 days, only from the Persian Gulf to the Sea of Oman and vice versa. So it will make arrangements using its best efforts for the safe passage. Now, I was debating with one of my guests. He's like, Mario, it says the best of efforts. Maybe Iran is trying to conduct its best efforts, but they couldn't resist but fire a drone. I'm like, that doesn't make sense. If it's the best of your efforts to make sure there's free passage, that means during the negotiations, ships should be able to go through for free, without being attacked. So I think the same way the US and Israel are breaching Clause 1, I think the Iranians, this is a blatant breach of Clause 5, in my views. I'm not sure if you'd agree.
I'd agree. We'll see how they respond. Probably we'll know in the morning, but I tend to think that because this is escalation, because it's a question over who controls the strait.
Yeah, and their IRIB news. I told you before. I don't know if it was before we went live or when I went live. I told you I got the alert on my phone in Dubai, and I knew it was a false alarm, and I thought it was drones heading towards one of those ships. IRIB just reported, the Iranian news outlet said, Iran state broadcaster IRIB reports that around 5 hours ago, several warning shots were fired from Siri County, southern Iran, towards violating vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. 2 missiles were also fired a few hours ago from around Karpan, southern Iran, towards the Strait of Hormuz. Iran is acting pretty aggressively. I understand they want to control the Strait of Hormuz, but there's different ways to control it, and this is probably the most aggressive way to control it. So they did put the US in a position, to be honest, where it's difficult not to respond, not to retaliate, because you're asking the United States to not only admit defeat and sign what some people are calling a declaration of defeat, a surrender, whatever, a surrender document. But you're asking them to really change the state of global shipping and the American security that was, as you said, that was provided for so many decades. What does that mean for global shipping? What does that mean for the markets if that does happen? Do the markets care if Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz or not?
Depends. I think what the market cares is, do you get adequate insurance coverage and ships go in? I know I have debates with people about the following. World scale, that's what you measure tanker freight rates on. It's called world scale, WS. Before the war, a world scale AG, Arab Gulf to East, meaning into Asia, AG East is what you call it, was somewhere around 50 world scale. Today it's 900 to move a ship. That's, almost 18 times. And people go, oh, it's because, everybody's, the demand's so high, you're moving all the ships. They go, no, it's so high because nobody's willing to go in there. They have to, that's hazard pay. And, if you look at it, yes, there's, last, 2 days ago, last time I looked at it, you had 4 million barrels of cargo tonnage that went into the straits to go get oil out of there. And I think that 900 is telling you, people watch this and they're going, I'm not going in there for 900. And so it tells you that insurance companies and operators, crew, they're not willing to go through there. I mean, if the U.S. is launching attacks on their drone sites and the Iranians are launching drones on ships, if I'm a crew member, that's pretty high probability that something's going to happen. And if I'm the insurer, the charter, am I willing to risk 900 to go in? For some reason, everybody tells me the 900 is evidence that all this stuff is coming out. No, it's evidence that nobody's willing to go in. You wouldn't be paying 18 times the price for a ship, to pick up a cargo inside the Gulf of everything, but they were big believers. So while it may not be happening in the price of oil, that's why it's one way. All the stuff came flowing out.
Yeah, exactly.
By the way, I'm not going to say there's nothing coming out. If you looked at it in the shut-in production, it was around 12 million barrels per day 2 or 3 weeks ago, and then it went down to 10. Now it's somewhere around 5.5, which means you probably got another 4.5. Most of that's UAE and Saudi that are completely ramped back up. Iraq and some of the other, Kuwait and some of the others have got some on, but it's going to take months. But I think the key message here is, you just got a little bit going out, and let's see what happens on Monday when people look at the risk here. So both sides have fired, and it tells you if I personally would not get in a ship and go through the Strait.
That must have been, you saw this news, that must be pretty good news for your portfolio. I just realized.
Yeah. Trust me, yes, I'm hurting after this period. But by the way, again, on that point, I just want people to listen. Why do I hold this stuff even when it's going down? It's that roll yield on the front end that gives you the return. And, it generated like 40% returns in like the April of this year. The way I like to say it is every commodities are long vol. Every time it spikes, you bank that on the roll. So spikes come up, you bank it. And that's the reason why I stay long on this. And so I took some damage, but it's not incredibly painful because that roll picked it up. And also, even if it rallies, if that front end remains down like that, you can't really make money on a rally until that front end pops up and gets in backwardation again, because that's what you're making money on.
Are you worried that this whole MOU could unravel? And do you think there's any, I wouldn't say any risk, but there's, above 10% risk or 20% risk that we could go back into a full-blown war? Or what would you give it as a probability?
I really struggle with that, because who is Iran going to strike? Now that the Gulf states are, buddies with them, for them to strike Americans, it's hard.
Jeffrey, the Gulf states were buddies before the war started.
Yeah.
The UAE was doing significant business with Iran.
I agree.
Qatar had good relations. Oman had good relations. Bahrain, Kuwait were indifferent. Saudi was improving relations. So
I agree with you 100%.
Now doesn't change.
Yeah, I agree with you 100% on that. It was the Americans and the Israelis, and if anything, I don't, the Americans were not that welcomed by most of their neighbors or people in the Gulf anymore, just given everything that's happened. So I struggle with what would a full-blown war look like. I mean, they've taken out that naval base in Bahrain. You'd have to take out one of those carriers out there. You have to do something like that. Because again, I just don't. I think the risk of losing oil assets is behind us. There's just no way that the Iranians are going to do that to their neighbors because they got to live with them.
But doesn't that give more leverage if the Americans know that the Iranians won't do that? So if you're making the argument the Iranians won't strike the Gulf because they can't, they'll be overdoing it, overplaying their hand. And if the Americans know that, doesn't that plus low energy prices, doesn't that give a lot more leverage now to the Americans? They know that the Iranians are in a tougher position to strike the Gulf. They know oil prices are significant. A lot of supply have flown out, so that gives them flowed out. So that gives a lot more leverage to the Americans. Doesn't that? Yeah. Can't the Americans be the ones to really start to instigate the Iranians?
I would say though that the risk here is that when you think about what does Iran stand for? The asymmetric doctrine of warfare. Use proxies. Don't attack the one that would be the obvious target. Go somewhere else. And they've got proxies in Latin America all over the place. Obviously, proxies in other parts of the Middle East. Who knows? There's maybe proxies in New York City. What that means is that this thing expands well beyond the Middle East, probably, because if that's the way they operate. So the response to this may be somewhere we don't even know or think about, because that's what they do, and that's what they invented it. They do it well.
Well, on the agreement between Lebanon and Israel, one thing that I was talking to guests is whether Hezbollah agrees with it. Well, Hezbollah supporters are apparently protesting right now in Lebanon, blocking one of the main roads, the road to the airport, in protest to that agreement. See, there's just a lot of things are up in the air right now, especially when it comes to Clause 1 and Clause 5. So we'll see. Anything else that worries you from an economic perspective? Anything else that you're keeping in eye? Obviously, the Fed is more hawkish by the looks of it. Gold prices have gone down. We talked about it briefly. The dollar is up. I'm not sure what that's going to do to the American manufacturing base, which the US has just woken up and realized it needs to focus more on that. But is that even possible with a high dollar? So I'm not sure if there's anything else that's worrying you right now.
I'm just surprised how people have abandoned the halo trade today when it was. If you liked it 6 months ago, 3 months ago, the fundamentals behind it are stronger today than at any other point in time. Yeah, it doesn't feel so good with gold at 3,900 and oil at, actually, I don't know where we closed today, but it could have even been a 6 handle on Brent. But I think I think it's 71. But I think the key message is the structural fundamentals that were driving that story are still very much intact. And anything the deglobalization story is going to increase the demand for commodities, for onshoring, defense, and energy security, all of the above. So, I just see the fundamental of the story much stronger than what it was before. That said, that risk reversal between the ceasefire and now is none like, again, I've seen a lot of firsts in these markets, and I've been doing this 3 decades. I've never seen a risk reversal that big, that quick, from people liking the halo trade and selling tech to back on the tech bandwagon and completely dumping the halo trade. So whether if it's oil, gold, copper, all the natural resources, all the elements of the periodic table that have been weaponized by the Chinese, the story is still rock solid.
All right. Well, this is it on the explosion front. There's no other information on it. That's it. I don't have any other updates for you. Now all eyes are on Iran to see how they'll retaliate. Maybe I can wrap it up with that last question for you, Jeffrey. I know you always try to avoid political discussions, but your insights, you should probably do more political discussions because you're a lot more clued in than many of my guests even. How do you think Iran will retaliate? You said they won't strike the Gulf. You did say they'll strike American bases. Do you think they will? Do you think they will? I don't know if they'll strike Israel, drag Israel into this. Maybe they would because they're pretty pissed off at Israel attacking Lebanon. But then they're playing into Israel's hand. Israel would like to see them attack them because Israel can retaliate and maybe force the US back into it. So I'm not sure if Iran would fall into that trap. So the only scenario that would make sense to me is attacking American bases or maybe closing the Strait of Hormuz. That's probably the. So the Americans would have calculated this. They're like, all right, what can the Iranians do? Well, they can attack our bases, but they know this is going to cause limited damage. We took out all the valuable equipment from there. They're not going to strike the Gulf because they're literally in the midst of talking with the Gulf. All the Gulf are visiting Iran. There's a meeting that's going to happen in Saudi. What else could they do? They can attack Israel, but they won't because they don't want to force Israel to bomb the hell out of them again or cause issues there. What's left? Oh, they can close the Strait of Hormuz. Well, that's fine. Oil prices are very low. Anyway, we have breathing space. Let them close it and then eventually reopen it. And we sent them a message. The Americans, what they did just now is send a message to the Iranians. They're like, hey, you sent us a message yesterday that you want to enforce your control of the Strait of Hormuz. We just sent you a message that we're not going to let that happen. So it's an interesting calculation on behalf of the Americans. It does. Would love to get your thoughts on what I just said. And as a final question as well, how do you think, if you had to speculate, how do you think they'll retaliate, if at all?
The obvious thing is closing the straits. As you said, oil price is low. No, none of them really like that. But then the question is, how does the U.S. retaliate? Does it retaliate? The problem is closing the straits hurts the rest of the world more than the U.S. It hurts Trump in his election, but it really doesn't hurt the Americans that much. It's more sentiment and political. By the way, him getting a victory in Iran with the, let's say a nuclear deal, the population in the United States cares. Like I don't have these numbers roughly, like 10% of the electorate cares about that. 49% of the electorate cares about inflation. So while it may not have a material impact on the economy, gasoline at $5 has a material impact on Trump's reelection efforts these midterms. And I bet you the Iranians know that. So if you want to hit them and hit it hard where it hurts, that's probably closing the strait.